Jig will catch bass any time of year, but with so many on the market, how do you know which one to use? Today I will show you my favorite jig for cold water bass fishing, how to rig it up, and how to fish it to catch more fish. By the end of today's video, this jig might just become your favorite bait as well. So what is this jig and what makes it special? This one here is a little jig that I build myself, but there are plenty others on the market available for purchase. A mini football jig, and this thing is excellent in those cold water months because of the small profile. If you actually look at the difference here between a regular football jig and this one, there's a huge size difference between these two jigs, not only in the head size, the hook size, the weed guard, the overall profile of the jig, and the length itself. It's just a much smaller, compact presentation that when these fish really aren't in the mood to feed and they're just kind of staying there, if you get this in front of them, they will most likely just bite it because it's an easy meal. So ultimately, this smaller profile leads to more bites, and more bites leads to more fish. Especially in the cold water months, that's very important to actually catch the most amount of fish possible out there during the winter. Now, we are briefly going to run through the gear that I like to fish this on and the gear you need to set this up, and then we will head out on the water and actually show you how to rig it up on the water and where and how to fish it and catch some fish along the way. Since this is such a finesse jig, I actually make mine two ways. One has a weed guard and one does not for more open water. So this one we're gonna fish today actually does not even have a weed guard on it, and it has a 2-aught Gamakatsu hook in it. And it's a light wire hook. It's literally the same hook that I almost put on my Ned rig jig heads or my swim bait heads. So I'm actually gonna be fishing this on a spinning rod. Now this spinning rod actually will also work for the weed guard version as well, because the weed guard I put in these are super light wire weed guards or light fiber weed guards. So your hook can come through really easily, and you could actually set the hook with a spinning rod and land fish. So this is the Icon spinning rod that I like to use, specifically the 7.2 medium heavy fast action. That medium heavy power is going to be super important, especially if you're gonna throw the weed guard version to actually set the hook. This is almost like a shaky head rod, a small jig rod is what I use it for. It's even my wacky rig rod. It works really well when you need a little extra backbone than your standard spinning rod. And then for the reel, I have a Shimano Sedona. It's the one that I use on all of my spinning combos. It's a super great budget spinning reel. And I have it spooled with that 15-pound test lime green braid that I have on all my spinning rods, because it allows me to see what my bait is doing down there on the bottom. I then tie an FG knot to some fluorocarbon leader, and we were using either 8 or 10-pound tests today, depending on how thick the rocks were and how abrasive they were. Somewhere in that 8 or 10-pound test is all you really need on a jig like this. If you're fishing any cover heavier than that you need heavier line, I would actually even just recommend going to the larger jig to begin with. And then as for the jig, again, I said this is a homemade one, but I will link some other ones down in the description below that are very similar to this. So if you don't have the gear to actually make this, you can just buy some online. You will notice that all the links will be going to Tackle Warehouse now. Super exciting news that they are a partner of the channel. I have been shopping at Tackle Warehouse since I was like 8 years old when I got into bass fishing. I have trusted their products my entire career, and they have literally everything for bass fishing. So the best way to help out the channel and allow me to continue making videos like this for you guys would be purchasing any of the products I talk about throughout the video through the Tackle Warehouse links down in the description below. It is greatly appreciated. As for the trailer I like to put on here, today we're gonna be using the Z-Man TRD. It's a super awesome trailer. Basically bulks up your Ned rig and gives it a little bit bigger profile, but still a finesse look and something those fish can just snack on. But some of the other trailers I have used before are the Great Lakes Finesse Snack Craw. So it's a very small crawfish profile. If you know those fish are feeding on crawfish, this is an awesome one you could use. It doesn't have a lot of action because there's no appendages on the actual claws. They're just straight claws there. The other one that I use is the Busa Ned Rig. That one is an awesome one as well. It has a little bit of a quiver to the tail, but it is a little bit longer than the Z-Man TRD. So if you're looking for a bigger presentation, you could go with this one. And then the last one that I like to use is the 6-inch stroker craw. If I'm looking for the biggest presentation possible, that would be the one that I put on there if I'm really trying to get some big bites or the water's a little bit warmer. But usually I like to stick with some of the straight Ned style baits. They work excellent on this technique, especially when fished in rivers. Okay, so now that we talked about what gear you need to actually fish this jig, let's show you how to rig one up, and then we'll show you how to fish it and where to fish it up on the front deck here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our fluorocarbon leader that we already tied on with our FG knot that we talked about, and then we're going to have to choose a jig color. This time of year, I like to keep it pretty simple. These fish are going to be feeding on crawfish and other small minnows and stuff like that on the bottom that are almost always greens and browns color. So I have a couple options here, one that's just straight green pumpkin and brown, one that has green pumpkin with a little bit of orange for a little bit dirtier water, and the other one we're going to play around with today is just a straight peanut butter and jelly, like a dark pumpkin with a little bit of purple on the belly. We're going to take the purple one here that we're going to try, and you're basically just going to tie this on with a Palomar knot. So your standard Palomar knot to tie on any other jig head. Basically, if you were going to tie on a Ned rig head, this is the same knot that I would use to tie that on. No equipment needed, just the jig itself, and now I have it tied on. We'll take our scissors and we will trim our tag end here. And now that we have our tag end trimmed up, we got to put a trailer on here. So we played around with a few different types of trailers today, and these fish are not willing to eat at all. The water temp is 45 degrees. It snowed last night. They really don't want to cooperate. So we're going to be using the Finesse TRD as a trailer just to get bites. It keeps a really small profile, but you can still get a little bit bigger bite because you have the skirted jig, and with that 1/0 Gamakatsu hook, it will fit just perfect on here with your TRD. So you'll thread it on just like you would any other Ned rig bait on a Ned rig jig head, and now you have a finished bait ready to go down there to catch some smallmouth bass. We did play around with the Boosa net a little bit. I felt that one was a little bit too long for the conditions today. I also used the Great Lakes Finesse craw today and the Stroker craw as well. Neither one of those performed. I felt that action was just a little bit too much for these fish considering it literally snowed last night. So now that we have our bait all rigged up and ready to go, we're gonna get up on the front deck. We're gonna show you where to cast this thing and how to fish it to catch a lot of bass. All right, so now we're gonna show you where to fish this jig to catch a bunch of bass, and then we'll show you how to fish it. The big thing with this, there's the weed guard version and the non-weed guard version like we talked about. The non-weed guard version is not going to be very effective in trees like something like this right here. So we have a giant tree down in the water. Now there will be fish in that, but the weed guard version would work much more effective. Unfortunately, I didn't have any more in the boat today, so we don't have a weed guard version and we might lose some jigs in the trees. But when you're fishing around rocks and big boulders like you might see up on the bank, or ones we'll show you down here in the water, those are going to be excellent for even the open hook version. You might hook up a little bit on the rocks, but most often if you get on the other side of the rock, you can just pop your bait off and it'll come right back out. Again, that football head shape, if you're fishing a regular Ned rig that has that circular mushroom shaped head, it will wedge into all of the little crevices in the rock because it doesn't have a wide profile up front. But because this bait has that wide profile for the football head, you can pull it through these rocks where these fish are living. When the water's super cold like this in a river, they're going to sit right behind a rock or this tree and use it as a current break so that they do have to exert zero effort to find food. So they'll hide behind that. And this is one of the few baits you can actually get down to them and fish slow enough to get them to bite. So let's get up here, make a couple casts, and we'll show you how to fish it, and hopefully we'll catch a smallmouth or two along the way. Okay, so now we're ready to fish. We got a key area where there should be some fish. We got our jig on. Let's get to fishing this thing. The biggest thing is taking your time. The slower you can go, the more fish you're gonna catch, especially in the winter like this. The fish are moving slow. You'll probably be moving slow. I'm all bundled up and I'm freezing, but we're just gonna fish this jig and drag it on the bottom, and that's gonna get us the most amount of bites. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna line up on our spot. We're gonna make a far cast wherever we want the bait to go. And all we're going to do is watch that lime green braid as it sinks down in the water. And I'll let that line go out and you'll see it slowly pull out until it hits the bottom. It's now laid slack and come back towards the boat, so I know my jig's on the bottom. And there's a couple ways you can fish it, but when the water is very cold, like this 45-degree water temperature, you cannot beat just slowly dragging it like this. So I will almost force myself to take my hand off the reel and slowly just pull it towards me and almost count it over the rocks, the sticks, everything on the bottom. I'll then pick my slack up and I will just go ahead and begin another drag, just slowly pulling it down the current. And you can change your weight size to get your bait to act properly in the current, but depending on how fast the current is going. So if you have stronger current, you could go with a heavier jig and it'll still flow naturally. If you have lighter current, you could go to that 1/4 ounce size like we're doing today, and it'll slowly float over those rocks naturally. And all I'm gonna do is just slowly pull this thing back towards me. So if you get this stuck on any rock or in between any rocks or anything like that, you can slowly just hop your bait over the rock and it should come just fine through there with that football head or the weedless version if you have it. Now the other way you can fish this, if the water's a little bit warmer or your fish are a little more active, again, it snowed last night, these fish are probably not gonna eat it this way, but you can almost fish it like you would a Ned rig and slowly hop it along the bottom just like this. And I will get it hopped up to a rock. It might catch the rock a little bit and I'll hop it over the rock. But I'm basically just shaking the slack in my line, getting it to hop down the bottom. So you can see I'll keep my hand on the reel now and I'll actually hop the bait a little bit in place and kind of work it back towards me, always making sure to keep contact with the bottom. But when you're fishing in the winter, I highly recommend against doing that because you're not gonna get as many bites because the bait fish and crawfish aren't down there on the bottom doing that. If you actually saw a crawfish on the bottom, it would literally be crawling like this slow. And that's what you want your jig to do. You literally just want to pull it nice and slow like this. And those fish are gonna see it slowly crawling and they'll work their way over to it and look at it and decide if they want to eat it or not, and then they'll pick it up and eat it and you can set the hook and bring them in. So let's cast this thing around and see if we can catch us a couple fish with it.
No way!
It's a giant. I don't have any camera on.
Yeah, you do.
Unreal. I know I said they wouldn't bite it hopping, but they bit it hopping. Look at that fish. I don't even have my microphone on. I hope you can hear me over the wind noise, but she got that right in the beak. Look at that. I got one. Not bad. So there's no denying that this dude is an absolute fish catcher, but if you'd like to see the alternative that I like to fish to this bait to catch even more bass, check that video out right there. Hit the subscribe button down below, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Bye, buddy.